Hey everybody, Professor Dust here. Today we're going to talk about shared leadership. So we've already talked about the different flavors of leadership, the different ways that we can influence others towards common goals. Shared leadership is a little bit different in that we're talking about how to influence each other when there's more than one leaders within a team. And as we've already talked about, anybody can be a leader, right? So this is talking about all of those different individuals that are working together in some type of team setting and what they're doing in terms of trading off and claiming and granting leadership roles within that team setting. So that's what shared leadership is all about. First, let's start off with a definition. So it's the dynamic, interactive influence process. So dynamic meaning it changes. It's not static. It doesn't just sit still. It's going to evolve over time. And then it's interactive in that it happens with a lot of different individuals working with and through others. And it is within a team setting, so among individuals within a team. We've already talked about what a team is, right? They got to be interdependent. There has to be some type of common goal. They're not just a group, but they're actually a team. And the objective is to lead each other towards those common goals, right? So it's not just one individual leading individuals, it's leading each other. And you can see in this little visual here, we have all these different arrows, right? So if you really kind of dive into the details and kind of peel back the layers of what could this look like, it gets pretty messy. You might have, just in this simple group of 4 individuals, a person on the left here influencing somebody at the top, to the right, and at the bottom. And this process can be reciprocal, so it goes both directions. And then same with everybody else on the team, right? So there's lots of influence processes going back and forth. And so then the key question is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Does that create challenges? What potential things could we do to make sure that that process works well? So let's break down some of these different components in a little bit more detail. So we've talked before about this idea of leadership being assigned versus leadership being emergent. And so in a shared leadership setting, what we're typically talking about is this idea of all 4 of these individuals are peers, they're colleagues, and at any point in time, somebody might emerge as a leader whenever they feel like it's appropriate to lead. Now, it's certainly possible that somebody within this team, where they're technically all peers, nobody reports to each other, that someone is formally assigned as that team leader. You could also make it even more complicated and say, oh, well, right now we're just talking about leadership that's internal, but what if there is this 5th person sitting out here that is an external formal leader? Right? So this external individual, they're not necessarily involved in the day-to-day tasks of that team, but they are someone that is overseeing and maybe responsible for the productivity of those individuals within a group, right? So there's all sorts of different variations of internal, external, formal, informal that could happen. But again, shared leadership in general is just this idea that mutual influence is going on, but it's also important to kind of piece that or put those pieces together and talk about, well, where is the formal leader, if there even is one? Are they internal, external, etc.? Now, the other part that makes this both more complicated but also more interesting is what exactly are we talking about when we're evaluating shared leadership? So in a very simple form, it could be as simple as we're just talking about general influence or general leadership towards others. And so we're just kind of leaving it open to interpretation of what exactly the leadership is. It's just very vague. And you can think about it that way and conceptualize it that way. And another way to do it is through more specific roles. So we've talked about team leadership roles. We've talked about navigator, integrator, facilitator, liaison as just one model that you could apply. And you might say, all right, let's look at this simple team of 4 people here. And perhaps each one of the individuals is engaging in one of those 4 roles. You could call that shared leadership. Or you might say each individual is engaging in all 4 of those roles. That would be shared leadership. Or maybe it's somewhere in between, where each individual is engaging in just 2 of the 4 leadership roles. Right? So the important part to recognize is that there's all sorts of variations and there's all sorts of gradations of what that shared leadership could look like. Right? Is it about dividing and conquering? Or is it about ensuring that everybody is there to back each other up depending upon what the circumstances and step up and do that role? So that's an important determination. Another thing you could do is start getting into specific leadership styles. So we've talked about transformational leadership, authentic leadership, servant leadership, transactional leadership, and we'll talk about a few more throughout the term. So you could also evaluate shared transformational leadership, shared authentic leadership, whatever you think is interesting or pertinent to the dependent variable of interest. So you could also look at more niche versions of shared leadership, or even making it even more complicated. You could say we have shared leadership when team member one engages in transactional, team member 2 engages in transformational, team member 3 is something else, team member 4 is something else, etc. Right? So again, the point is that there's all sorts of variations of team leadership, or of shared leadership, so it's important to really break down what exactly the type of shared leadership is. So there's all sorts of terminology that is applied in practical settings and real organizations. One popular one is self-management. The case that you'll be reading, the Morningstar case, they use the terminology self-management. There is what's called a self-management institute. And essentially what they're doing is setting up shared leadership processes. And then another term that is used is holacracy. Holacracy is used by Zappos. Holacracies are used by Gore-Tex, and there's a bunch of others. You could actually look at the Self-Management Institute website, and they would list a bunch of relatively well-known companies that are employing some form of shared leadership, and they probably call it something like holacracy. Right, so just keep that in mind. There's different terminologies for this very technical term of shared leadership. All right, so there's been meta-analyses that have evaluated, hey, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? When does it work? When does it not work? And one of the interesting considerations is evaluating shared leadership as the independent variable, and then looking at team effectiveness as the dependent variable, and then the moderating variable being what is the organizational structure, number one, and then number two, what is the type of job? And so when they look at organization type, one important or one very popular evaluation is whether it is organic or mechanistic. And so, as you can see in most of the meta-analytic results, and there's multiple meta-analyses recently, they're showing some trends toward, again, this is in general, that shared leadership tends to work best in organizations that are more decentralized. They use teams. This is organic, and they don't have a lot of formal rules, policies. You know, picture kind of like the tech startup mentality where everybody's getting done whatever they need to get done, and they work together and however they think makes sense, and they're very adaptive and agile. Mechanistic structures, on the other hand, you know, picture, I don't know, a very layered organization, the federal government perhaps, military operations, large manufacturing companies, multinationals with all sorts of different divisions. You know, all those types of entities might be more mechanistic, centralized decision-making focused on efficiency. And another one is, again, the type of job, and knowledge worker type positions versus knowledge worker type positions. Again, in general, the meta-analyses are showing that it's easier for that shared leadership to relate to some type of good performance variable like team effectiveness. Now, interestingly, the case that you're going to do on Morningstar, it's a tomato processing plant, right? That's not necessarily a knowledge worker type facility. And so there certainly are exceptions to the rule, but it's interesting to think through in general why these types of trends are happening. So what are the good and the bad, the benefits and detriments of shared leadership? So number one, when you have shared leadership, you're going to have an increase in diversity of thought, because when it's not top down and everybody instead is influencing each other, everybody has their own perspectives, opinions, ideas, and they're influencing others based upon what they think is the right thing to do. So you get more ideas, you get more information sharing, and that's a good thing. Another one is that you have some degree of backup behaviors, right? So you're not relying on somebody to do role or skill, whatever it is, X, Y, or Z. Everyone is saying, I got to do this functional leadership mentality of stepping up and do whatever's necessary to make the team work. It's not, hey, I'm just a follower, I do what I'm told, and I stay in my lane. It's, no, we're all leaders, we're all trying to get something done, we're all trying to move forward, right? So that mentality of of collective effort and working together is good. Another benefit is this idea that people like it. People want to be able to influence others and have more autonomy and independence. And you have that to some degree when you are a leader. And that can be fulfilling and that can be engaging. So people that have this type of work arrangement or some degree of this work arrangement typically are more fulfilled and more engaged. But it's never perfect. So some of the challenges of team leadership is that it's going to be more difficult to coordinate tasks and coordinate roles. And you might have redundancies. If everyone's trying to do the same thing all at once, you're going to basically be taking more time to figure out who's doing what in terms of roles and why they're doing what, right? So if it's just hierarchical, it's all just kind of decided for you. And now in the shared leadership environment, you have to kind of negotiate what that's going to be. Similar in a related sense, this communication efficiencies, right? So there's no direct line of communication. One person is telling subordinates, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to do it. There's going to be a lot more conversation. It's a little bit more democratic, and so it takes more time, it takes more influence to actually make something have forward progress, right? It's not just, hey, top down, get this done. Another potential challenge is what happens when you have a stalemate and you just don't know what the right direction is. Usually that's the leader's job or the manager's job. The buck stops here is kind of the mantra of the leader or manager. Hey, if everybody can't disagree and nobody's 100% sure what to do, it's on me to figure it out, right? I have this authority and I'm just going to make the call. But if you are at the extremes of shared leadership and everybody is legitimately and equal, how do you do that? What happens when you take a vote and it's 2 and 2 or 3 and 3, right? You don't have somebody to be the tiebreaker. Okay, so some key considerations. Number one, shared leadership, just like all of the leadership styles that we've talked about, is it's a continuum, right? You can have a little bit, you can have a moderate amount, you can have a lot. So the big examples that you're going to see, like in the case and with like Zappos and a few others, those are really taking it to the extreme of shared leadership, like with these holacracy and self-management mentalities, where they legitimately do not have anybody that's technically superior to anybody else, right? They really consider all of themselves equals doing something on equal footing. Nobody has authority on over the others. And it's possible, though, to maybe be more somewhere in the middle or engage in different pockets, right? Where it's an overall structured organization, but within certain divisions, there's somebody who's in charge, but then everybody else is engaging in shared leadership, right? So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It can be taken to the extremes, but it also can be something that's customized for certain teams and certain divisions, etc. Another key consideration is this idea of structure as strategy. So this is shared leadership is a leadership construct, but it also is getting at this idea of how to structure your organization or how to structure your teams, and thinking about this idea of shared leadership as an actual strategy. So, for example, the Morningstar case that you're going to read, this is an actual strategy where they're basically saying, this is who we are as a company. We're going to attract the best possible employees to our company because they want to be a part of this shared leadership initiative. That's their human capital strategy. Similar with Zappos. It is built into their culture, right? The reason people want to go work there is because they think it's fun, they like the culture, they have these growth opportunities, they love being independent. That is their strategy. They think that aligns with the type of customer service and the type of product and the type of brand they're trying to create. So, it's not just a way of getting things done. It can also be a way to signal to the world, hey, here's how we're different. Come work for us instead of somebody else and get those best employees, right? It's always a war for talent, and that's a way to potentially do that. Another key consideration is it just, I've already said this basically at the taken to the extremes example. So you could do, I think it's called an M-form organization, where you embed these pockets of shared leadership. And by the way, it's also called collective leadership, distributive leadership, multi-leader teams is what I've called it in my research sometimes. It just kind of depends on the audience. But you can embed those shared leadership structures within a larger entity. Another key question or consideration is, what type of system are we going to use to make sure everybody's accountable, right? When you have a hierarchy and you have this structure, it's easy. This person is supposed to report to this person, and that person monitors what their subordinates are doing, and there's kind of this check and balance process. As you'll see in the Morningstar case, they have a very expensive, time-consuming system. They call it CLOU, C-L-O-U. And everyone has to submit their the tasks that they're working on and who they're going to work with, and there's a whole feedback system. Kind of think of it as like, this like Amazon.com feedback system for buyers and sellers. And that's become, a very similar model for a lot of the transactions that happen online. That type of like ability to rate each other and get feedback on each other and get scores is built into an organizational system. That's how they create accountability and responsibility, which is tough to implement, and it's hard to get everybody on the same page for why it needs to be used and create some systems and efficiency. So that's another key consideration. Another important consideration, which I'm going to prime you guys with in your module write-up, is the career implications. Like, is this really good for all? What types of people might want to work here? I've actually done some research with Paul Green, who's formerly he's mentioned in the Morningstar case as the person in charge of implementing this self-management approach. And we did a lot of interviews as well as some data analysis on the types of people that were in the organization and who was a fit and who wasn't a fit, whether they liked it or didn't like it. I'll reveal some of those key takeaways in the feedback for some of your submissions, but it's really interesting to see the people that fit in or don't fit into the organization and what that means for leadership and growth. A last key consideration is this idea of instilling a mindset for the employees. So I love this statement, and I think it applies really well to what shared leadership is all about. What kind of leader are you when no one is required to listen to you? What kind of leader are you when no one is required to listen to you? Right? In this extreme shared leadership mentality, right, no one really has to listen to you as a leader. In order to influence people, you got to use logic, you got to use evidence, right? You have to be empathetic. You have to really be a good communicator. Like, what exactly is it about that setting that's different than a traditional setting? No one has to do it, right? They're not required. And so I think that the organizations that do have this thorough integration of shared leadership, they do a really good job of creating that mindset of it's not about power. It's not about politics. It's about this ability to get things done the right way, right? Through logic, through evidence, through just being a good colleague and employee. So that's another important consideration, right? In building that into your culture. So that's it for the shared leadership material, and good luck.